Hello and welcome back in my third and last session of Control and Coordination chapter. In previous part we studied about endocrine system. Here we are going to study about electrical signaling via nerve impulses, that is the nervous system. The nervous system is having a structural and functional unit called nerve cells. So let's study the structure of it.
Huh? Oh. Ah. Huh? Ah. Huh? Ah. 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 Oh.
Now let's move forward and study the type of nervous system. There are mainly two types of the nervous system, the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. The central nervous system, as the name is suggesting, it is in the center of our body and it comprises of brain and the spinal cord. Now let's study the structures and functions of both of them one by one.
Human brain. The brain is divided into three parts: the forebrain, the midbrain, and the hindbrain. The forebrain is the largest part of the brain, most of which is made up of the cerebrum, also known as telencephalon and diencephalon. The cerebrum is divided into two halves called cerebral hemispheres. Each hemisphere is hollow internally and their walls have two regions: the outer cortex, that is grey matter, and the inner white matter. Grey matter contains cell bodies of neurons. Grey matter is highlight folded to form the convolutions, and these folds are known as gyri and the grooves are called sulci. Sulci and gyri increase surface area to accommodate more neurons. It is believed that a large number of convolutions in the human brain indicates greater intelligence as it contains more intelligence. White matter mainly consists of axons or neurons. The two cerebral hemispheres are connected by a sheet of fibers called the corpus callosum. Its function is to transfer the information from one cerebral hemisphere to the other. Left hemisphere controls voluntary limb movements on the right side of the body. Almost every person has one dominant hemisphere. The cerebrum is associated with higher brain function such as thought and action. Each hemisphere is divided into four lobes or areas which are interconnected. The frontal lobes are located in the front of the brain and are responsible for voluntary movement and participate in the execution of speech output, mood, and memory. The parietal lobes are located behind the frontal lobes and in front of the occipital lobes. They process sensory information such as temperature, pain, taste, and touch. In addition, the processing includes information about numbers and attentiveness. The temporal lobes are located on each side of the brain. They process memory and auditory, that is hearing information, also deal with the speech and language functions. Encephalon is the posterior part of forebrain. It contains structures such as the thalamus and hypothalamus. Thalamus is located at the base of the hemispheres. It relays sensory impulses such as pain to cerebrum. Hypothalamus is located below the thalamus and it regulates autonomic functions such as appetite, thirst, and body temperature. It also secretes hormones that stimulate or suppress the release of hormones. For example, growth hormone in the pituitary gland. The midbrain, also known as the mesencephalon, is a short, constricted portion which connects the forebrain and the hindbrain. Mesencephalon consists of cranial nerves which control the reflexes involving eyes and ears. The hindbrain, also called the rhombencephalon, is a brainstem connecting the brain with the spinal cord. It is composed of the metencephalon and the myelencephalon. The metencephalon contains structures such as the pons and cerebrum, while the myelencephalon contains medulla oblongata. Cerebrum is located just behind the cerebrum, above the medulla oblongata. Like cerebrum, it is also divided into two lateral hemispheres, which are connected by the medial part called vermis. Each hemisphere has a central core made of white matter and an outer region made of grey matter. The main function of the cerebellum is to maintain balance of body and coordinate muscular activity. Pons is also a part of the metencephalon. It is a broad and horseshoe-shaped mass of nerve fibers. It is located below the cerebellum. It serves as a bridge between the midbrain and the medulla oblongata. It is also the point of origin or termination for 4 of the cranial nerves that transfer sensory information and motor impulses to and from the facial region and the brain. Myelencephalon, or the medulla oblongata, is the lowest part of the brainstem and is continuous posteriorly with the spinal cord. It has a central core made of grey matter and an outer region made of white matter. Medulla oblongata contains several functional centers that control autonomic nervous activity, regulate respiration, heart rate, and digestive processes. Other activities of the medulla include control of movement, relaying of somatic sensory information from internal organs, and control of arousal and sleep. Injuries or disease affecting the middle portion of the medulla oblongata may produce paralysis of the opposite side of the body, loss of the senses of touch and position, or partial paralysis of the tongue. Injuries or disease of the lateral medulla may cause loss of pain and temperature sensations, loss of the gag reflex, difficulty in swallowing, vertigo, vomiting, or loss of coordination. The spinal cord and transmission of nerve impulse. The second and the most important part of the central nervous system is the spinal cord. The spinal cord, major nerve tract of vertebrates, extends from the base of the brain through the canal of the spinal or vertebral column. A cross-section of spinal cord reveals that grey matter lies inside and the white matter on the outer side of the spinal cord. The grey matter is composed of neuron cell bodies, and in a cross-sectional cut, it appears as a dark stained, H-shaped central area. The white matter contains axons running longitudinally to and from the brain and even crossing from one side to the other. There is a central canal which runs the entire length and is continuous with the cavities of the brain. The spinal cord is divided into cervical, thoracic, lumbar, sacral and the coccygeal regions. 8 cervical segments transmit signals from or to the areas of the head, neck, shoulders, arms and hands. 12 thoracic segments transmit signals from or to the part of the arms and the anterior and posterior chest and abdominal areas. 5 lumbar segments transmit signals from or to the legs and feet and some pelvic organs. 5 sacral segments transmit signals from or to the lower back, pelvic organs, genital areas and some areas in the legs and feet. The coccygeal remnant is located at the bottom of the spinal cord. The spinal cord helps in connecting the various organs of human body to the brain. On one hand, it accepts the electrical information through sensory neurons and sends it to the brain, while on the other hand, it sends the signals from the motor area of the brain back to the various parts of the body. Yet another function of spinal cord is to coordinate various reflexes in our body. Apart from neurons, brain and the spinal cord, nerves are also important structures because they carry impulses to and from the brain. There are 2 structures present in nerves: receptors and effectors. Receptors are structures at the ends of the nerve fibers that collect the information to be conducted by the nerves and send to the central nervous system. Nerves in turn conduct these impulses from the central nervous system and send them to the effectors, which are muscles or glands, which work in response to the stimulus received from the brain. The first type is a sensory nerve, which contains sensory fibers that bring impulses from the receptors to the brain and the spinal cord. For example, optic nerve arising from eyes and ending in the brain. The second type is motor nerve, which contains only motor fibers carrying impulses from the brain or the spinal cord to effector organs to bring them into action. For example, a facial nerve arising from the brain. The third type of a nerve is mixed nerve, which carries both sensory and motor fibers. For example, a glossopharyngeal nerve. Of the many kinds of neural activities, there is one simple kind in which a stimulus leads to an immediate action, known as reflex action. A reflex action is an involuntary and nearly instantaneous movement in response to a stimulus. Reflex actions enable the body to give back quick responses to harmful stimuli, so that chances of damage to body are decreased, and they also prevent overloading of the brain. A reflex action must be quick to have value. Therefore, the pathway for receiving and sending information must be short. The anatomical pathway of a reflex is called the reflex arc. The nerve cell, dendrites, respond to a stimulus and convert it into an impulse in a sensory neuron. The nerve impulse from a receptor passes through an axon terminal of the sensory neuron in the spinal cord. In the spinal cord, the sensory impulse generates an outgoing motor impulse by an association between the sensory neuron and the motor neuron. Motor neuron then carries an impulse to the effector organs like a muscle or a gland. Let us now learn how is a nerve impulse transmitted. In the normal or resting condition, the outer side of the nerve fiber carries positive charge. This is called polarized state or the resting potential, which is due to more sodium ion outside the axon membrane. On stimulation, the axon membrane at that point becomes excited and becomes permeable to sodium ions, which move inwards, and the nerve is then in a depolarized state or the action potential. The point of depolarization becomes the stimulus to the neighboring region, also making it depolarized. Meanwhile, the previous area becomes repolarized due to the active transport of sodium ions again to the outside. So this alternate depolarization and repolarization of neuron causes transmission of nerve impulse. This nerve impulse is then transferred from one neuron to the other neuron by the process called synapse. It is a point of contact between the axon terminal of one neuron, known as presynaptic neuron, and the dendrites of another neuron called postsynaptic neuron. Both these neurons are separated by a synaptic cleft. As soon as the nerve impulse reaches the axon terminals of a depolarized presynaptic neuron, a neurotransmitter, acetylcholine, is released in the synaptic cleft. It diffuses rapidly and binds itself to the receptors of the dendrites of postsynaptic neuron, causing depolarization of the postsynaptic neurons, and a nerve impulse is then transmitted. The central nervous system integrates countless bits of information and generates appropriate reactions to various stimuli. Together with the peripheral nervous system, it plays a fundamental role in controlling behavior.
Reflex Action and Reflex Arc. You withdraw your hand. When your fingers touch a hot object, you close your eyes. When bright light is focused on your eyes, you sneeze. When something enters your nose, you cough. When you inhale dust, etc. All these are reflex actions, or called reflexes. Reflex actions are very important as they save us from painful or dangerous stimuli. Reflexes are fast, immediate, automatic, and involuntary responses of the body. Reflexes occur without our thinking. Brain is not involved in the execution of several reflexes. The entire process of response to a peripheral nervous stimulation that occurs involuntarily, that is, without conscious effort or thought, and requires the involvement of a part of the central nervous system is called reflex action. The structural and functional unit that carries out reflex action is called reflex arc. Reflex arc consists of a receptor, a sensory nerve, efferent, an association neuron, motor nerve, efferent, and effector organ. The receptor may be a single cell or group of cells. They receive information about stimuli and generate electric potentials. The sensory nerve is associated with the receptor. It carries the information from the receptor organ to the spinal cord. In the spinal cord, the sensory nerve makes connections with other neurons in the gray matter. These neurons are called interneurons or association neurons. The neurons process the information and generate responses. The efferent fibers of motor nerves carry these responses from interneurons to the effector organ, which is usually a muscle. This makes the muscle to contract. Components of reflex arc. Function. 1. Receptor. Receives information and generates impulse. 2. Sensory neuron. Efferent. Carries information from receptor to the interneurons in the spinal cord. 3. Interneuron. Processes the information and generates response. 4. Motor. Efferent neuron. Carries the information from spinal cord to effector organs. 5. Effector organ. Receives the information from the efferent neuron and shows appropriate response. There are two types of reflexes: unconditional reflexes and conditional reflexes. Unconditional reflexes. These are inborn reflexes. These reflexes are inherited and are shown from birth onwards. These reflexes are present in all individuals and animals and are basically same. They are not learnt. For example, nobody taught us to withdraw our hand when we touch a hot object. Conditioned reflexes. These are not inherited. It is learned by doing the same act several times. Ivan Pavlov, a Russian scientist, did experiments on conditioned reflexes. His experiments on dogs have become very famous. It is known fact that when the dog sees food, it salivates. He rang a bell whenever the dog was given food. After doing this for a few days, he noticed that dog salivating when it hears the bell, even if the food is not given. That is, the dog associated the sound of the bell with the food and assumes that whenever the bell rings, food is given. In expectation of food, saliva starts flowing from its mouth. For example, standing in attention when you hear national anthem is a conditioned reflex.
So now let's study the next type of the nervous system, that is peripheral nervous system.
Peripheral nervous system. The nervous system is a complex, sophisticated system of the human body. It regulates and coordinates our bodily activities. This system can be divided into two parts: the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. Let's take a look at the peripheral nervous system. The peripheral nervous system is a channel for the relay of sensory and motor impulses between the central nervous system on one hand and the body surface, skeletal muscles and internal organs on the other hand. Neuron or a nervous cell is the basic building block of our nervous system. There are two types of neurons in the peripheral nervous system. Neurons which carry information from the body to the central nervous system are called sensory neurons, whereas neurons which carry information from the central nervous system to the rest of the body are called motor neurons. The cell bodies of peripheral neurons are often found grouped into clusters called ganglia. The peripheral nervous system is composed of two kinds of nervous systems. The first one is called the somatic nervous system, which is composed of spinal nerves and cranial nerves. The cranial nerves are the ones which exit from the brain, and the spinal nerves exit from the spinal cord. There are 12 pairs of cranial nerves. Some cranial nerves are sensory nerves which carry sensory information from the external stimuli or body organs to the central nervous system. For example, olfactory nerves for nose, optic nerves for the eyes, and auditory nerves for ears. Some cranial nerves are motor nerves, like the ones going to the eye muscles that carry information from the central nervous system to body organs. Most of the cranial nerves contain motor as well as sensory fibers and can be described as mixed nerves, like the ones that originate and terminate in the face and tongue. There are 31 pairs of spinal nerves. These nerves are grouped into 8 cervical, 12 thoracic, 5 lumbar, 5 sacral, and 1 coccygeal, according to the region of the vertebral column from which they arise. All of the spinal nerves are mixed, that is, they contain both sensory and motor neurons. The fibers of the nerves are packaged together in a nerve but separate near the attachment of the nerve to the spinal cord. This produces 2 roots to each nerve. The dorsal root, which is composed of sensory fibers, and the ventral root, composed of motor fibers. The dorsal root contains an enlargement called the dorsal root ganglion, where the cell bodies of the sensory neurons are located. The cell body of motor neurons is not located in a ganglion, but instead is with the gray matter of the spinal cord. The somatic nervous system controls the skeletal muscles as well as the external sensory organs such as the skin. This system is said to be voluntary because the responses can be controlled consciously. It includes all of the nerves that serve the skeletal muscles and the exterior sense organs. It also includes reflexes. The autonomic system is part of the peripheral nervous system, responsible for regulating involuntary body functions such as blood flow, heartbeat, digestion, and breathing. It is generally without conscious control, whereas most of its actions are involuntary, such as breathing, work in tandem with a conscious mind. These involuntary actions are controlled by antagonistic actions of the 2 divisions of the autonomic nervous system, the sympathetic and the parasympathetic divisions. The sympathetic system regulates the flight or fight responses, that is, quickly activates our body, preparing it for action by increasing the heart rate, dilating the pupils and vessels to the muscles, increases skin sweating and suppresses digestion. The sympathetic nervous system stimulates the body and helps us to deal with emergency situations. Stimulation from sympathetic nerves dilates the pupils, accelerates the heartbeat, increases the breathing rate, and inhibits the digestive tract. On the other hand, the parasympathetic system controls the opposite responses to flight or fight responses. That is, depresses the activity of the body, preparing it for rest by decreasing the heart rate, constricting the pupils and vessels to the skeletal muscles, and stimulating digestion, peristalsis and salivary production. In short, the parasympathetic system returns the body functions to normal after they have been altered by sympathetic stimulation. In times of danger, the sympathetic system prepares the body for violent activity. The parasympathetic system reverses these changes when danger is over. Unlike the central nervous system, the peripheral nervous system is not protected by the bone of spine and skull or by the blood-brain barrier, leaving it exposed to toxins and mechanical injuries. There are more than 100 kinds of peripheral nerve disorders. They can affect one nerve or many nerves. Some are the result of disorders like diabetic nerve problems. Others happen after a virus infection or injuries. For example, Guillain-Barré syndrome, which happens after a virus infection. Some people are born with peripheral nerve disorders. The peripheral nervous system is what operates the functions of our body that we carry out on a day-to-day basis and is therefore imperative to our survival.
I hope you people have enjoyed the teaching learning process here. Stay home, stay safe. Bye bye.